Clara moved through the glittering crowd like a ghost, her presence a necessary but almost invisible part of the evening's machinery. Her uniform, a simple black shirt and crisp white apron, was a stark contrast to the sea of jewel-toned gowns and dark tailored tuxedos that swirled around her. The air in the grand mansion was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, a smell so different from the Greasy Spoon diner where she usually worked the breakfast shift. Here the laughter was softer. The music was a gentle classical hum from a live string quartet in the corner, and the conversations were in hushed, important tones. For Clara, this party wasn't a party. It was a mission. Every step she took on the polished marble floors was calculated. Every tray of champagne flutes she carried was balanced with a practiced grace that she had, perfected over years of serving tables in her head. As she navigated the maze of guests, she wasn't thinking about the rich and famous. She was silently rehearsing scales, a habit that calmed her nerves and kept her mind focused. La 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 la, going up the ladder, then back down. It was a secret world she carried with her, a world of melodies and harmonies that felt more real to her than the crystal glasses and fancy appetizers on her tray. This one night of work, this single event, could pay for 3 whole vocal coaching sessions. 3 sessions with a woman who had actually sung on a stage in Milan, not just dreamed about it. The thought was a beacon in the long, hard hours of her everyday life. It was the reason she had taken this extra gig, even though it meant working 16 hours straight with only a short break. The money wasn't just for rent or groceries. It was for a key that might one day unlock a door to a different life. She watched the host of the party, a man named Alistair Finch, from a distance. He was like the sun in this little universe, and everyone else was just a planet orbiting his light. He had a full head of silver hair and a smile that seemed to be permanently fixed on his face, a smile that made people lean in a little closer, hoping some of his success would rub off on them. He was the picture of everything Clara was not: confident, powerful, completely at ease, in a world that felt like a museum to her. He held court near a grand fireplace, telling a story that had a small group of guests roaring with laughter. Clara couldn't hear the words, but she could see the effect he had on people. They hung on his every word, their faces glowing in the warmth of his attention. As she passed his group, she kept her eyes downcast, focusing on the tray. Her job was to be a shadow, to refill glasses and clear away empty plates without being noticed. She had learned early on that the best way to survive in these kinds of places was to make yourself as small and quiet as possible. A guest, a man with a ruddy face and a booming voice, reached past her for a drink without a word of thanks, his arm brushing against her shoulder. She didn't flinch. She just steadied her tray and moved on. She was used to being invisible. It was a skill, just like being able to carry 4 full plates at once, or remember a complex order without writing it down. She made her way back to the temporary kitchen set up in the mansion's ballroom, a place of controlled chaos compared to the serene elegance of the party. The other waitresses and servers moved with a quiet urgency, their faces a mixture of fatigue and concentration. Clara took a moment to catch her breath, leaning against a stainless steel counter. She thought about the faces she had just seen, so relaxed and full of life. They worried about stock prices and vacation homes. She worried about the squeaky brake on her car and whether she had enough money left to buy her mother a decent birthday present. The gap between their world and hers felt as wide as the ocean. But then she thought about the music. The music was the bridge. When she sang, none of that other stuff mattered. It didn't matter that her shoes were worn or that her apartment was small. When she opened her mouth to sing, she felt tall. She felt powerful. That feeling was worth all the long nights and the aching feet. It was worth the feeling of being an outsider, because it reminded her that she had something inside her that was truly her own, something that no amount of money could buy. She picked up another tray, this one laden with small, delicate-looking things on crackers. She didn't know what they were, but they probably cost more than her weekly grocery bill. As she stepped back into the grand hall, she felt a sudden chill, a prickle on the back of her neck. She instinctively looked up, and her eyes met Alistair Finch's. He was watching her from across the room. His smile was gone, and in its place was a look of cool assessment, his eyes scanning her from her worn-out work shoes to the neat bun in her hair. It wasn't a friendly look. It was the look a man gives a tool, checking to see if it's good enough for the job. The look lasted only a second before he turned his attention back to his guests, his easy smile snapping back into place as if nothing had happened. But Clara felt the weight of that glance all the way back to the party. It was a reminder of her place in this world. She was just the help, a part of the scenery, and for a moment, she felt a flicker of fear, sensed that something about this night was about to go terribly wrong. The feeling of being watched, of being judged by Alistair Finch, clung to Clara like a damp chill she couldn't shake off. She tried to push it away, to focus on her job, but his cold assessment had lodged itself under her skin. Her hands, usually so steady, felt a little less sure on the tray. The music from the string quartet seemed a little louder, the laughter a little sharper. She took a deep breath, trying to find the calm center she relied on, the place where the scales and melodies lived. Up the ladder, down the ladder. But the music in her head was faint now. It's drowned out by the pounding of her own heart. She was making her way through a particularly tight knot of guests. Near the grand staircase, the party was in full swing now, and the polite reserve from earlier had melted away, replaced by a louder, more energetic buzz. People were talking over each other, their gestures becoming more expansive. A man with a ruddy, flushed face was telling an animated story, his voice booming above the others. He was backed up against the bottom step of the staircase, completely absorbed in his tale, his arms flying through the air to make a point. Clara saw him, but there was no other path. She had to get through. She turned her body sideways, holding the tray high and away from the people, trying to make herself as small as possible to squeeze past. Just as she was beside him, he threw his head back with a loud laugh and took a sudden, dramatic step backward to emphasize his story. His elbow connected squarely with the tray she was holding. It wasn't a hard push, but it was enough. It was a sudden, sharp jolt that sent a shockwave up her arm. For a moment, time seemed to slow down. She felt the tray tilt, a horrifying, weightless feeling. She saw the full glass of deep red wine, the one she had just poured, tip over the edge. It seemed to hang in the air for a split second, a graceful ruby-red teardrop, before it fell. The splash was quiet, but its effect was deafening. The wine landed squarely on the pristine white dress of a woman standing right in front of the storyteller. The red spread instantly, a blooming, ugly stain on the expensive fabric, like blood on snow. A collective gasp went up from the small group. The laughter died. The storyteller stopped mid-sentence, his mouth agape. The woman looked down at her dress, her face a mask of shock and then disgust. Clara's training kicked in immediately. "Oh my God, I am so sorry," she stammered, her voice trembling. She put the no-imbalanced tray on a nearby table with a clatter. "Let me help. I can get a cloth, some soda water." It might come out if she reached out instinctively, wanting to help, to fix the terrible thing that had just happened. But before her fingers could touch the fabric, a voice cut through the silence. A voice that was calm and yet carried an absolute authority. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Everyone turned. Alistair Finch was standing there, having approached silently from the main hall. The crowd seemed to part for him without even thinking. He wasn't looking at the woman with the stained dress or the clumsy man who had caused the accident. His eyes were locked on Clara. The look she had seen from across the room was back, but now it was intensified, a laser beam of cold. Hard focus. He walked toward her slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. He circled her once, like a shark assessing its prey. Clara felt frozen to the spot, her hands half raised, her apology dying on her lips. The air grew thick and heavy, so he began, his voice soft enough that everyone had to lean in to hear. "What do we have here? A little mishap?" He stopped in front of her, his gaze dropping to her worn-out shoes and then traveling slowly back up to her face. "What's your name?" "Clara," she whispered, her throat dry. "Clara," he repeated, as if tasting the word. "Clara. You know, Clara, some people are just not built for certain environments. It's like putting a fish in a tree. It's not the fish's fault exactly. It's just a fundamental mismatch. A few people in the crowd gave nervous, tittering laughs. The sound was like sandpaper on Clara's raw nerves. She wanted to defend herself. She wanted to say, "He backed into me. It wasn't my fault." But the words wouldn't come. Her mouth was dry, and his presence was so overwhelming that it felt like a physical weight on her chest. Alistair gestured vaguely in the direction of the stained dress, still not looking at the guest. "This is a very expensive dress. And this is a very important party. I pay a premium for a certain level of service, a certain seamless experience. I expect the people I hire to be invisible, to be part of the background, not to become a focal point." Let the word hang in the air. "It makes me question the catering company's hiring standards. Are they just pulling people in off the street now?" The humiliation was a physical force, a hot, suffocating wave that washed over Clara. She could feel her cheeks burning. She could feel the eyes of every single person in the group on her. Their looks a mixture of pity, contempt, and morbid curiosity. She was no longer a person. She was an object lesson, a public spectacle. She thought of the money, the 3 vocal lessons, and it felt like a foolish, childish dream now. In the face of this man's casual cruelty, her dream felt small and pathetic. He leaned in a little closer, his voice dropping even lower, for her ears only but loud enough for those nearby to hear. "You have to learn your place, Clara. It's a valuable lesson. It saves everyone a lot of—" Messi straightened up and addressed the head caterer who had rushed over, his face pale with panic. "Get her out of sight," Alistair said, his voice suddenly bored and dismissive, as if he were swatting away a fly. "We don't want her breaking anything else." The head caterer, a kind man named Mr. Henderson, put a gentle but firm hand on Clara's arm. "Come on, Clara," he murmured. "Let's go to the kitchen." Clara allowed herself to be led away. She couldn't look at anyone. She kept her eyes fixed on the floor, counting the polished marble tiles as they walked away from the scene. 1, 2, 3. The walk back to the kitchen felt like the longest journey of her life. She could feel the stairs on her back. She could hear the party's noise level rising again as she left. The laughter and music starting up once more, washing over the spot where she had just been torn to pieces. It was as if she had never been there at all. The heavy door to the service kitchen swung shut behind her, blocking out the sound and the light, and leaving her alone in the sterile quiet with the crushing weight of her shame. The heavy door to the service kitchen swung shut, and the world of glittering light and muffled laughter disappeared. In its place was a world of stainless steel, harsh fluorescent lighting, and the low, constant hum of industrial refrigerators. The air smelled of bleach and chopped onions, a scent that was real and honest. A world away from the cloying perfume of the party. Clara leaned against a cold metal counter, the surface doing nothing to cool the fire of shame that was burning through her. She squeezed her eyes shut, but all she could see was Alistair Finch's face. His eyes cold and dismissive, and the circle of guests looking at her like she was a bug under a microscope. His words echoed in her head. Each one a fresh little stab. A fish in a tree? Learn your place. Get her out of sight. She had been made to feel small before, but this was different. This was a public, deliberate stripping away of her dignity. He hadn't just been angry about a stained dress. He had enjoyed it. He had used her as an example, a prop, in his little show of power. She thought of the 3 vocal lessons, the dream that had kept her going through 16-hour shifts. It felt so stupid now. A silly fantasy. Who was she kidding? She was a waitress from the wrong side of town, and no amount of singing could ever change that. Alistair Finch had just shown her the truth, and the truth was a heavy, fading blanket. Her hands were still shaking. She balled them into fists, trying to stop the trembling, but it was no use. She felt a hot tear escape and trace a path down her cheek. She angrily wiped it away. Crying was for the weak, and she refused to give him the satisfaction, even though he wasn't there to see it. She just wanted to go home, take a long, hot shower, and wash this entire night from her skin. She wanted to crawl into her own bed, in her own small apartment, pretend this never happened. The kitchen's relative quiet was suddenly shattered by the swinging door bursting open again. It was the event planner, a woman named Diane who had been buzzing around the party like a nervous, well-dressed bee. But now, her perfect composure was gone. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with panic, and she was clutching her phone so tightly her knuckles were white. "What do you mean you can't sing?" she hissed into the phone, her voice a strained whisper. "You're supposed to be on in 20 minutes. Laryngitis? Are you kidding me?" She paced back and forth in the small space, her expensive heels clicking sharply on the concrete floor. No, no, no. This is a disaster. A complete and utter disaster. Do you know who is out there? Do you know how much I am getting paid for this event? She listened for a moment, her face crumbling. Fine, I hope you feel better. She ended the call and just stood there for a second, staring at the wall as if it had personally betrayed her. The head chef, a large, bear-like man with a kind face and a permanently stained apron, looked up from the pot he was stirring. "Troubled, Diane?" he asked, his voice a low, calm rumble. "Trouble?" Diane laughed, a short, hysterical sound. "The headline act, the famous opera singer, has lost her voice." The headline act. In 20 minutes, Alistair Finch is going to expect a world-class performance. And all I have is a string quartet and a full room of very important, very bored people who have already finished their dinner. She started pacing again, wringing her hands. I can't call anyone else. Not at this hour. Not on a Saturday night? We're ruined. He'll ruin me. He'll never hire me again. The chef, Mr. Gable, didn't say anything right away. He just stirred his sauce, his movements slow and deliberate. His eyes, however, were thoughtful. They drifted over to Clara, who was still standing by the counter, trying to make herself invisible. He had seen her come in, seen the look on her face. He had heard a whispered version of what had happened from one of the other servers. He knew Alistair Finch knew the man's capacity for casual cruelty. He had also heard Clara sing, many times. Late at night, after the main kitchen staff had gone home, when it was just her and the cleanup crew, she would hum. Sometimes, when she thought no one was listening, she would sing, softly at first, then a little louder. He remembered one night she was scrubbing a stubborn pot, and she was singing an old Italian song, her voice filling the empty kitchen with a sound. So pure and full of feeling that it had made him stop what he was doing and just listen. He had never said anything, not wanting to embarrass her, but he had never forgotten it. "Hold on," Mr. Gable said, putting his spoon down. He turned to Diane. "Breathe. Just for a second. I have an idea." Diane looked at him like he was crazy. "An idea? George, unless you can pull a Pavarotti out of that stock pot, I don't think an idea is going to help." The chef ignored her sarcasm. He walked over to Clara. Clara flinched, expecting him to tell her to go home, that she was fired. Instead, he just looked at her with his kind, gentle eyes. "Clara," he said softly, "you sing, don't you?" Clara stared at him, confused. "What? I mean, I hum sometimes." "Why?" "No, you sing," he said, his voice firm but kind. "I've heard you. That Italian thing you hum while you're scrubbing pots. You have a voice." Diane's head snapped up, her eyes scanning Clara with a new, desperate interest. She's a waitress. Can she sing something? Classical. Something for this crowd? Clara's heart started hammering against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. Sing for them? For the man who had just publicly shamed her? Who had made her feel like dirt? The idea was absurd. It was horrifying. "No," she said, shaking her head. "No, I can't. I'm not. I'm not a performer." "Yes, you can," Mr. Gable said, his voice low and encouraging. "Don't do it for them. Don't do it for him. Do it for you. He tried to take something from you tonight. Don't let him keep it." His words hit her with a surprising force. "He tried to take something from you." She looked at her reflection in the shiny metal surface of a nearby refrigerator. She saw a scared girl in a cheap uniform, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear and shame. She saw the girl that Alistair Finch had seen, and she hated it. A small, hot spark flickered to life in her chest. It wasn't courage, not yet. It was just refusal. A refusal to be broken. A refusal to let that man define her. Diane was in front of her now, her hands clasped together in a pleading gesture. "Please," she begged. "It doesn't have to be long. Just one song, anything. I will pay you double, triple, whatever you want. Just please, save me from this." Clara looked from Diane's desperate face to Mr. Gable's quiet, steady gaze. The thought of walking back out there, of facing all those people, made her stomach clench. But the thought of leaving this way, of letting Alistair Finch win, letting this shame be the final word of the night, felt even worse. Her dream of vocal lessons felt distant, but the music itself was still inside her, a part of her that he couldn't touch. Maybe, just maybe, she could touch them back. She took a shaky breath, the air catching in her throat. She thought of the scales she hummed to calm herself down. Up the ladder, down the ladder. She could do this. She had to do this. She looked at Diane, her voice barely a whisper. "Okay," she said. "I'll sing." The walk from the kitchen back into the main hall felt longer than the entire journey she had taken to get to the mansion that evening. Diane, the event planner, fluttered beside her, giving last-minute, frantic instructions. Just one song, maybe two if they love it. Something they'll know. And smile, for heaven's sake. Try to look like you want to be there. Clara barely heard her. Her blood was pounding in her ears, a loud, rhythmic drum that drowned out everything else. Each step was a battle. A part of her, the part that was still curled up in shame, was screaming at her to turn back, to run out the service door and never look back. But another part, a small but stubborn spark that Mr. Gable had fanned into a flame, pushed her forward. She wasn't doing this for them. She was doing this for herself. As she emerged from the service hallway, the atmosphere of the party washed over her again. The lights seemed brighter, the laughter louder. People turned to look, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and confusion. They saw the waitress from earlier, the one who had caused the scene, now walking toward the small, cleared area near the fireplace where the performers were set up. A murmur went through the crowd. She could feel their eyes on her, the same eyes that had watched her humiliation, but now they held a different kind of energy. It was the energy of a crowd waiting for a spectacle. She was terrified she was about to give them one. They didn't give her a stage. They didn't even introduce her. Diane just pointed her toward a single microphone on a simple stand. It looked lonely and exposed in the middle of the grand room. Clara walked toward it, her legs feeling like they were made of lead. Her uniform felt rough and cheap, a constant reminder that she didn't belong here. She was an imposter, a waitress about to make a fool of herself in front of some of the most powerful people in the city. Her eyes scanned the room and found him. Alistair Finch was standing near the bar, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He had a perfect view of the microphone. He wasn't laughing, but there was a smirk on his face, an air of bored amusement. He was expecting a disaster. He was probably looking forward to it. Another little story to tell his friends about the night the help tried to sing. The sight of his smug confidence sent a fresh wave of anger through her, and it was exactly what she needed. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but now it was mixed with a hot, burning defiance. She reached the microphone and stood behind it. The room was still buzzing with conversation. No one was paying her full attention yet. She could see the string quartet members looking at her with pity, their instruments resting in their laps. Her hands were shaking so badly she was afraid she wouldn't be able to adjust the stand. She took a deep, shaky breath, and then another. She closed her eyes. This was the only way. She had to block it all out, the faces, the lights, the man who had tried to break her. In the darkness behind her eyelids, she began to climb the ladder in her mind. La la la, up and up, each note a steady, sure step. She focused on the feeling of the music, the one place where she was always in control. She wasn't a waitress in a mansion. She was just a girl with a song inside her. Then she opened her mouth and sang. The first note of O mio babino caro was not loud, but it cut through the noise of the party like a knife. It was a single pure sound, so clear and beautiful that it seemed to suspend time. The chatter in the room didn't just die down. It vanished. One by one, heads turned. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. A man putting a glass to his lips froze. The string quartet members stared, their own instruments forgotten. The note hung in the air, perfect and achingly lonely. And then she sang the next and the next. It wasn't just that her voice was technically perfect, though it was. It was the emotion she poured into it. The song is about a young girl pleading with her father, begging him to let her marry the man she loves. It's a song filled with desperation and love. And as Clara sang, she wasn't just telling that old story. She was telling her own. She poured all of her humiliation into the notes, all of her anger at Alistair Finch, all of her desperate hope for a different life. Every note was filled with a raw, heartbreaking honesty that resonated in the chest of every person listening. She was no longer just a waitress. She was a vessel for a feeling so pure and powerful that it transcended the room, the uniforms, and the social statuses. The crowd was mesmerized. A woman in the front row brought a hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with tears. The man who had caused the wine spill stood motionless, his face a mask of utter disbelief. People who had been ignoring her moments before were now leaning forward, completely captivated, their faces illuminated by the soft stage lights. The entire energy of the room had shifted from one of casual indifference to one of rapt, silent awe. The space between her and the audience had dissolved. There was only the voice, the story it was telling. And then there was Alistair Finch. The smirk had vanished from his face the moment the first note left her lips. Now his expression was one of pure, unadulterated shock. His glass was frozen halfway to his mouth. He stared at her, his eyes narrowed, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing and hearing. The fish in a tree was singing with the voice of an angel. The girl he had so casually dismissed, so cruelly shamed, was holding the entire room in the palm of her hand. The realization of his colossal mistake, of the ugliness of his own actions, was dawning on his face, and it was not a pretty sight. He looked smaller, less powerful, stripped of his easy authority by the sheer, undeniable power of her talent. As the song reached its climax, Clara's voice soared, filled with a power that seemed impossible coming from her small frame. She opened her eyes then, and for the first time she truly saw the room. But it was different now. They weren't looking at her with pity or contempt. They were looking at her with reverence. She held their gaze for a moment, her voice strong and clear, a look of quiet defiance in her eyes. She was not the girl they had shamed. She was the artist they had underestimated. She held the final note. A long, shimmering sound that filled every corner of the vast hall and then let it fade into a perfect, profound silence. For 3 full seconds, no one moved. No one breathed. The air was thick with the ghost of her voice. Then, a single person started to clap. It was the head chef, Mr. Gable, standing in the doorway to the kitchen, a huge, proud smile on his face. And then, like a dam breaking, the applause erupted. It wasn't the polite golf clapping from before. It was a thunderous, deafening roar that shook the room. People were on their feet, shouting brava and encore. Their faces were transformed, flushed with excitement and emotion. But Clara didn't wait for their praise. She didn't look for Alistair Finch, she just gave a single shaky nod to the crowd, a brief, tearful smile of release. And then she turned and walked away, leaving them all in the wake of a sound they would never forget. The thunderous applause followed her as she walked away, a roaring wave of sound that seemed to push her forward. But Clara didn't turn back. She didn't bask in it, or wait for it to die down. The performance wasn't for them. It was for herself, and it was over. She walked with a steady, purposeful stride, her worn-out work shoes making no sound on the thick, expensive carpet. She bypassed the service hallway, the route for the help. Instead, she walked straight through the grand foyer. The same way the guests had arrived when the night began, the heavy front door was manned by a young man in a sharp uniform, his face a mask of professional neutrality. But as Clara approached, his eyes widened slightly. He had seen what happened. He had heard the singing. He didn't say a word, but he gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod of respect as he pulled the heavy door open for her. The cool night air rushed in to meet her, a welcome relief from the stuffy, perfumed atmosphere of the party. It felt clean and real on her hot cheeks. She stepped out into the quiet of the exclusive neighborhood. The mansion was set back from the road. The only sounds were the distant hum of traffic and the gentle rustle of leaves in the manicured trees. The grand door swung shut behind her, and the sound of the applause was finally cut off, leaving a profound and ringing silence. She was alone. She stood there for a moment on the top of the stone steps, looking out at the streetlights casting a soft glow on the empty road. She took a deep breath, the first one that felt truly her own all night. The air filled her lungs, and with it came a sense of release so powerful it almost brought her to her knees. The shame was gone. The humiliation had been washed away, not by their applause, but by the act of singing itself. She had taken the worst moment of her life and turned it into something beautiful inside. The party was in a state of stunned chaos. The applause had eventually faded, but the energy it left behind was electric. Guests were clustered in small groups, their voices buzzing with excitement and disbelief. Who was she? A man in a crisp tuxedo asked his wife. Did the catering company know? Was that a planned act? The woman with the stained dress looked down at the ugly red mark on her gown. But for the first time all night, she didn't see it. All she could hear was the sound of that voice, a sound that had made her forget everything else. The disaster of the spill now seemed like a necessary, almost fateful prelude to a moment of pure magic. Diane, the event planner, was frantically searching for Clara. Where did she go? She demanded of a nearby waiter. Find her. I need to talk to her. Do you have any idea what she just did? She just saved this party. She saved my career. But no one knew where she was. She had vanished as suddenly as she had appeared, and then there was Alistair Finch. He stood by the bar, his glass of untouched whiskey still in his hand. The party was swirling around him, but he was an island of stillness. The smug amusement was gone, replaced by a dark, thunderous expression. He had been outplayed, outshone. The girl he had dismissed as a fish in a tree had grown wings and flown circles around him, right in front of everyone. He had tried to shame her into invisibility, and in response, she had made herself unforgettable. The power in the room had shifted, if only for a few minutes, from him to her. And he had no idea how to handle it. He saw Diane rushing around and grabbed her arm. Find her, he said, his voice low and commanding. I don't care what it takes. Find out who she is. I want to talk to her. He wasn't sure what he would say when he found her. It wasn't an apology. Alistair Finch didn't apologize. Maybe it was an offer. A job. A contract. He wanted to own that voice, to put it in a box and control it, to prove that even raw, incredible talent was still subject to his influence. But when his people went looking, they found nothing. The waitress had signed in, done her job, and left. She was a ghost. She had slipped through his fingers. And the fact that he couldn't find her, couldn't control the aftermath, was the final insult. Clara walked down the long, winding driveway, her footsteps echoing in the quiet. She didn't look back at the glowing mansion. Her focus was on the road ahead. She reached the main street and started walking toward the bus stop. A lone figure in a black and white uniform under the orange glow of the streetlights. A city bus rumbled past, its windows lit up like a string of moving pearls. She wasn't at the right stop yet, so she just kept walking. The adrenaline was beginning to fade, leaving a quiet exhaustion in its place. But underneath the tiredness was a deep, unshakable peace. She thought about the look on Alistair Finch's face, the shock, and the dawning realization. It wasn't about revenge. It was about balance. She had taken the cruelty he had thrown at her and transformed it into something else. She hadn't fought him with anger. She had fought him with beauty. And beauty had won. She reached the bus stop and sat down on the hard plastic bench. The night air was cool, and she pulled her thin uniform jacket a little tighter around her. A few cars passed, their headlights cutting through the darkness. The people inside had no idea that just a few miles away, a waitress had brought a room full of millionaires to tears with a song. They didn't know, and that was okay. The victory wasn't for them to witness. It was hers alone. The bus finally arrived, sighing to a halt in front of her with a hiss of air brakes. She climbed on, fumbling in her pocket for the fare. The bus driver, a tired-looking man with a kind face, barely glanced at her. She was just another passenger at the end of a long shift. She found an empty seat near the back and sank into it, resting her head against the cool glass of the window as the bus pulled away from the curb. She watched the city lights blur past. She thought about the vocal lessons, the dream she had been chasing. The dream was still there, but it felt different now. It wasn't a desperate escape anymore. It was just a path, a direction. The real prize, she realized, wasn't a stage or an audience. The real prize was the quiet, solid feeling inside her chest, the knowledge that her voice and her worth could never be truly shamed. They were hers. They had always been hers. Tonight, she had just reminded herself, and a few hundred other people, of that simple, powerful truth. And as the bus carried her home, she smiled, a real, genuine smile that was just for her.